I think one of the most important things as a YouTuber to do is to explain problems that I'm currently having and the solutions that I'm finding along the way. Over the last few productions, I've been dialing back my saturation, and I want to tell you the story of why I decided to do so and what kind of results that I'm getting from that. Right here, I'm working on a track which has a very dynamic section, and there's a lot of plucky sounds in there. And what I found is that my usual kind of preparation mixing technique that I usually use to get them into the production mix doesn't really work here. Hey guys, I quickly wanted to say that my second masterclass is out now on my Gumroad. It's about 24 hours of edited footage of me making the track that you're listening to right now. So go check it out if you're interested. So for a little background on my mixing style, I basically mix twice. I have my production mix where I add all of the effects that I want in the production. This is for aesthetic reasons. This is what I want the sound to sound like in the context of the track that I'm working on currently. It also houses my delays and my reverbs. Those are all part of the production session because they are part of the actual sound. Within sidetrends, delay tails and reverbs are generally considered part of the sound because they're so big and they're so important within the mix. Then my second session, I render out every single sound individually on audio tracks and then re-import them into a Reaper project. I've talked about this before, why I do it. I have shown the Reaper projects on stream. I've mixed on stream before, but you'll see that it's much more like a clinical approach to mixing. I redo all of the volumes, I literally normalize all of the tracks and then reset up the whole gain structure within the project. And I've been working like this for almost a year now. Before that, I just used to use the production mix that I ended up with at the end of my productions. And what I've noticed throughout that time is with heavily saturated leads, there's this common problem of losing that dynamic feeling that you want from some of the sounds. So let's have a listen to this example here. I'm going to play a little segment from this track here. So as you can hear, there's a lot of dynamic sounds within this project. And what used to happen for me is that within the production mix, what I wanted to get is a very nice kind of gain structure. When producing, it is often nice to have all of your tracks actually peak at the level that you set in the mixer. So for example, for this sound, I would like it to peak roughly around -15. For this one, I would like it to peak roughly around -4. And for example, for this one, I would like it to peak at around -15 again. In order to do that, what I used to use was heavy saturation on all of my main elements and then add our delay and reverb after that. So we could get small fluctuations because of the delay and the reverb. They could make it slightly louder, they could make it slightly quieter, but usually what would happen is it would stay around the area at which I was saturating and which I was soft clipping the actual sound. Then once I got into actually mixing my tracks and doing it into the Reaper project and no longer using the production project as my main mix, as my final mix, I found out that you lose a lot of the definition of some of the elements doing it. Even though that in my production mix, the way that I was mixing things, they sounded very clear to me. Because I'm using the saturator as a make it louder effect, I could get these elements really, really loudly sitting in the mix. That was until I needed to mix them into the Reaper mix, in which they caused me problems. The heavy saturation that I used to do on my elements made it so that it was really hard to balance the mix once it was in a new project. So for that reason, I decided for a few productions not to saturate some of my elements. Whenever I did saturate my elements, it would be very, very light saturation. You can see, for example, here, this is definitely a saturator and it's definitely on there, but it's not as harsh as it used to be. To give you an example of how I would set this up normally, let's have a look at the actual sound. This is the sound that I had selected. Now you already noticed that there's a delay before the actual saturator. Usually I wouldn't do that, so for that reason, if I were to apply my old method, this delay would definitely be behind it. In this case, I'm actually using the saturator partially to bring out some of the delay tail. You can see that there's a no feedback delay in here, so there's only going to repeat once. And they're just slightly more dry than they are wet. So I'm using the saturator to kind of balance it out a little bit more. So a quick example of that. It just brings out the delay tail a little bit more. But this kind of trick wouldn't work in the way that I would saturate before. So we're going to move it behind it so that I can show you how I used to do it. So what I would aim for is very nice loudness and also making sure that they're always being clipped and taking off all of the peaks. In this case, we already have a higher than 0 input for it, but I would like really drive it into the saturator, maybe at like 8. And this gives you that extra definition that you'll get from extra loudness. One of the things that I wasn't taking into account is the fact that once you get into the mixing stage and you're going to redo all of the volumes and all of the volumes are normalized, this is going to cause you trouble because it might be at a louder point than that you need or at a quieter point than that you need, and then the saturation is just going to throw you off. What I wasn't taking into account was the fact that I was adding 5 dB to the saturator and listening to the actual difference in perceived loudness. Now, one of the things this has resulted to is a little bit of an issue with my workflow. As I said before, I used to often make sure that the levels that are represented here were also roughly the peak level of the sounds that I have. Nowadays, in some cases, I stray away from that. And you can see that in some of the volumes that I set here. You can see that some are abnormally high. So for example, this -4, this -6, and this -8. If I were to saturate this and gain stage this sound, then the levels that are represented in the mixer right now are just too loud for the sound. But for some reason, I just didn't do my gain staging. This is actually a production project that I was working on right now, so I may have gotten to it in the actual session if I didn't decide to record this video. But I essentially decided to just leave this at a lower than 0 volume. You can see that this isn't hitting the actual 0 line. I can show that better if I go here to 0 and then just open this up. The 0 line is roughly where my mouse is. So you can see that it's quite significantly lower than 0. So you can see that obviously my approach to saturation has changed quite a lot over the last few productions. I've been doing things completely differently, just not saturating them as much, only using the saturation for the actual color that I want and not the actual loudness or the stability of the actual sound. But hopefully where this video really shines is as a reminder that sometimes within your workflow there's things that are counterintuitive that you need to look into and see and adapt once you find some kind of issue with your workflow. And I think something that goes under the radar with learning music production is the fact that just because something is done like this, or just because you have been doing something for a very, very long time like this, doesn't mean that there are better or more efficient approaches for you. And I think people need to realize that innovation within your productions, going from one system of doing things to a new system of doing things, can actually progress your music quite a lot. What people tend to focus on is trying to adapt little tricks into their existing workflow without looking at how can my workflow be adapted to not have to rely on simple tricks, but be a system that just naturally produces the best possible music. And whether that be changing the way that you make a kick and bass, or changing the way that you mix, changing the way that you deliver a track, or changing the way how you sound design, there's a bunch of different things that, for example, just like this saturation thing, may hinder you in some regard and that you need to change, instead of looking for workarounds or quick fixes. So hopefully this video can be an inspiration for you to do that. If you like this video, then let me know by leaving a like. And if you're new here and you want to see more of my channel, then make sure that you're subscribed. Also, if you want to receive messages from YouTube whenever I upload something, you can hit the bell icon down below. That way YouTube notifies you whenever I upload something. But that's going to be it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.